Welcome to another episode of the Sleeper Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Lehman. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we have Ladd McConkey versus Keon Coleman. Who's going to have the better rookie season? And who should you be drafting in your fantasy drafts? So let's get into it. All right, so there's two things you need to know about Ladd McConkey. The first one is his high efficiency metrics in college. And number two is the massive opportunity that he has with the LA Chargers this year. They are number one in vacated targets this year, and that is why everybody loves Ladd McConkey. So I was watching Hard Knocks the other day, and it was kind of interesting because on the Giants draft board, Ladd McConkey was in red. And on Twitter, I think we all came to the conclusion that this was just because he was an injury concern, okay? So that's one thing to look out for Ladd McConkey is that he has had a lot of different injuries pile up on him, and that has led to him not having as much time on the field as we would have liked. There's also already news of him having a lingering injury at Chargers practice. His keep trade cut value right now, he is wide receiver 26. That is over Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas Jr. To me, that's absolutely insane, but we'll keep going. He was a 3-star recruit coming out of college by 24/7 Sports and ESPN. His draft capital, he was the 34th pick overall in the draft by the LA Chargers. He's 22 years old, 5'11", 186 pounds, so he's a little on the smaller end, but he had a 9.34 RAS score because he ran a 4.3940 at the combine. And this is where Ladd McConkey blew up. I kept trying to figure out where he blew up or why everybody decided to just hop on the Ladd McConkey bandwagon. It was the combine, okay? And the fact that he went to school at Georgia probably helps him out too because he just had name recognition. All right, so let's get into some of the deeper metrics with Ladd McConkey. He was 5th in routes run for Georgia last year. Kind of concerning, but obviously injuries played a part in that. He was 3.26 yards per team pass attempt, which is absolutely insane. That is really good. He just couldn't stay on the field, but when he was extremely efficient. And I know everybody always says your best ability is availability. So him being injury prone is something to just keep an eye on. Obviously, with the injury concern already coming out of camp, not off to a good start. Let's get into his college stats. So in 2021, he had 31 receptions for 447 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also ran for 44 yards on the ground with another touchdown. So he has the ability to, be a weapon, be versatile, and also get yards on the ground. In 2022, his sophomore season, 58 receptions for 762 yards and 7 receiving touchdowns. He also had 7 attempts on the ground for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a total of 9 touchdowns his sophomore season. That's incredible. And then in 2023, came back down to earth, 30 receptions for 478 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. And he had 38 yards on the ground for another rushing touchdown. So, we would have really liked to see his production ramp up his junior year, but obviously the injuries led to him not being on the field. The injuries were just a problem and affected his production. So when he was on the field, he was great, but he was not on the field as much as we would really have liked him to be. All right, and then Mike Clay over at ESPN, this is his projections for Ladd McConkey his first year. So he has him going for having 98 targets, 63 receptions, 798 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. He has him as the wide receiver 43 in his rankings. All right, let's get into Keon Coleman with the Buffalo Bills. 2 things you need to know about him. He has elite size, and he is a highlight reel, an absolute highlight reel. The athleticism of Keon Coleman cannot be overlooked, even though he did not have the greatest combine, which is why Pre-draft, he was being dropped down by the community. But then when he was drafted at the top of the second round at pick number 33 by the Buffalo Bills, obviously people were back in. They decided to trade back. They had an opportunity to get Xavier Worthy, but they decided that they felt Keon Coleman was just as good of a prospect on their board. All right, so his keep trade cut value right now, he is at wide receiver 33, below Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas Jr. This seems a little bit more reasonable, in my opinion. He was a 4-star recruit by 24/7 Sports and ESPN. He's 21 years old, so 1 year younger. He's 6'3", 213 pounds, had an 8.18 RAS score, and he ran a 4.61 40 time. Nobody likes to see that. But you do have guys that run slow 40s that still end up being good wide receivers in the NFL. For example, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I think Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp was also a slow 40 guy. But sometimes the, route running can compensate for running a slow 40 time, and sometimes your football speed is just a little bit faster than your track speed. One thing I wanted to kind of take a look at is that while he was at Michigan State, he did outperform Jayden Reed. So Jayden Reed is a proven NFL wide receiver. Is he an elite wide receiver 1? No, not yet. Right? But he's a solid wide receiver, and he's shown after his rookie season that, he led the Packers in receiving. So obviously that kind of pedigree, if Keon Coleman was leading the wide receiver room that he was playing at in Michigan, then Keon Coleman, probably a pretty good prospect, right? But his poor efficiency metrics are a little bit of a concern. So let's get into his college stats. So in 2021, he did absolutely nothing. He had 7 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown, and that was at Michigan State. In 2022, his sophomore season, he had 58 receptions for 798 yards and 7 touchdowns. And then his junior year at FSU, after he transferred, he had 50 receptions for 658 yards and 11 receiving touchdowns. He also had a couple more games. He ended up with like 900 or so all-purpose yards. It's not elite numbers, and obviously we would like to see more of a jump in his junior season with FSU, but that's just not how it happened. I was kind of interested. I did look into the fact of like what really happened, because he started off the year great with FSU, and then he kind of just, stopped performing as well. And that is one concern with Keon Coleman, is just the fact that his college stats his junior year weren't as impressive. He was an early declare though. So we kind of need to say, have we seen enough from him? When we look at the film, does it show enough? Does he have enough traits to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL, or just to be a competent wide receiver for fantasy? Mike Clay from ESPN has him going for 58 receptions, 806 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And that would give him 168.93 fantasy points in PPR. And that would also have him finishing as the wide receiver 46. All right. So who should you be taking? So when we look at the projections, they are only 3 spots apart in Mike Clay's projections. You have them at wide receiver 43 and wide receiver 46, separated by 5 fantasy points. In his rankings, or in his projections, they're separated by 5 fantasy points. I think a lot of people are going to choose Ladd McConkey here. And this is why I wanted to make this episode. I think for the value, Keon Coleman is just a better value. He is. And, yes, Ladd McConkey, he had the injuries, and that's why we didn't see him have this breakout junior year. But at the end of the day, Keon, in my opinion, showed more. He has that prototypical size. He has more upside. He was an early declare. He's one 1 year younger, but I think a little bit more than that as well. At the end of the day, Ladd McConkey is just too overpriced for me. If you're going to be putting him over Xavier Worthy and Brian Thomas Jr., way too expensive. Those two guys, in my opinion, should without a doubt be ahead of Ladd McConkey. And I know people disagree with me on that, but that's where I have them personally. I think that Ladd McConkey and Keon Coleman are in a tier below those guys. So yeah, the fact that people are paying up for Ladd McConkey close to where you would take Jonathan Brooks or above Brian Thomas and Xavier Worthy, that's just, I think we're overemphasizing the opportunity. All right. Just because the LA Chargers are first in vacated targets, yes, it's a good opportunity, but I think we're going to be disappointed, right? I think we're going to be disappointed. We're putting too much on him winning that room, being a wide receiver one, and just lighting the earth on fire, right? And he could. I'm not saying that, but I don't think he will. I think we're going to be a little disappointed. It could work out. You know, he's partnered up with Justin Herbert, and Justin Herbert is an elite quarterback. He throws the ball a lot. But in my opinion, I think that the Chargers wide receiver room is just such a problem at the moment. They're going to keep trying to add to that wide receiver room in the future. So you better believe that they're going to try to give Justin Herbert weapons in the future. I think it's going to be a rough year for the Chargers, but they're going to keep going at wide receiver in the draft and probably a higher end prospect in the future. So that's a little bit of a concern. He's not an elite wide receiver prospect. He's not a Marvin Harrison Jr. He's not a Malik Neighbors. He's not a Rome Odunze. So I expect the Chargers in the future to go after a prospect like that, right? And there's a couple of them coming up this next year. Just to sum it up, Ladd McConkey, he has the better opportunity, right? You can't deny it. But in my opinion, I would choose Keon Coleman because he is the better value. That's going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you haven't already, please go check out the 2024 rookie cheat sheet. You can get it online at sleeperdynasty.com or check the show notes for the link. If you like the show and you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating and review and make sure to hit follow. And if you're on YouTube, make sure to smash the like button and subscribe for future episodes. You can also follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Sleeper Dynasty. Peace.